When you're texture painting, there's few things as annoying as painting and not seeing anything happen, or seeing it be painted incorrectly or in the wrong place. There's a lot of ways that texture painting can go wrong. And the thing is, the people that have been using Blender for a long time, they tend to not run into these issues because they know the little tiny tips and tricks, and they know them so well that at this point it's just muscle memory for them. People that are just starting out with the software or don't have that kind of long-standing experience often run into these issues because you're not going to find this information in most tutorials. Like, some of the tips I'm about to show you, you can find one place or another, but I'm self-taught in Blender, and all of this information I'm about to share with you comes from multiple different sources. You'd have to watch a couple different videos, read a couple different articles, read some Stack Overflow questions. Like, this information is not well collected. And so, I'm not necessarily an expert on the subject, but I just want to show some quick tricks that can make your texture painting process smoother if it's not working right. So first of all, number one thing, I'm just going to go kind of in order of things you can do. The first thing to try is to make sure that you're trying to paint the right object. So for example, I've got two objects here and I've selected both of them. And if I switch into texture paint mode, make sure I've got texture painting set up. Very cool. I don't know which of these two objects is going to be painted on. And I'm looking at this blue outline here, and that's helpful to know that this object is the one that will be painted. But if for some reason I had overlays turned off, or if I had a bunch of objects selected, or if I just wasn't paying attention, I might miss that. And if I tried painting on this one, it would actually end up painting on this one. Or rather, it wouldn't paint at all because my brush wouldn't be overlapping this object in any way. So that's number one. Pretty simple. Just because that's kind of a special use case, I'm going to switch to just one object at a time now. I kind of like this orange one or yellow one a little bit better. So I'm going to make that more of a cube. There we go. Alright, issue number 2. Go back to texture painting, and I'm actually going to pull out my pen here and try and texture paint. Nothing's happening. Well, luckily the error message down there will tell you what's going on. In this case, missing UVs are detected. You need to have UV mapping done in order to texture paint, and so if you just press U in edit mode, you can just... I usually just go for Smart UV Project. There's all kinds of different ways to do it, but for texture painting, especially for a simple primitive like this, Smart UV Project will work fine. Let's head back to texture paint and try that again. There we go. So that's more what you're supposed to be seeing. Also, that's very ugly. Give me just a second to fix that, because I do not like the way that looks. Let's set that to smooth. Sure, that's white. Very cool. Options. Let's turn that up. Cool. Try that again. It's all beautiful, but you get the point. Stop that. Alright, let's undo that. Alright, let's look at the third issue. So for this one, I'm going to deliberately do something to this object that will make it not work correctly. Which you wouldn't normally do, I'll give you that. But here's the thing. This issue is one that I've often run into because it just happens sometimes. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. But essentially what I just did is I flipped the normals. And so the faces are now facing inwards instead of facing outward. And if you try to paint on this, nothing happens. You can't paint on faces that are facing inward. This is a tricky one because it's pretty hard to tell the difference, especially on a simple primitive like this, what's inside and what's outside. Luckily, there is an overlay for that. If you go down here to the face orientation, it'll show you red obviously is facing inside and blue is facing outside. And because I use that so often, I've added it to my quick favorites menu so I can just quickly turn that on and off. Either way, in this case, it's very easy to fix this. All you gotta do is, and I've added this to my quick menu as well, flip it. And if we head back into texture paint mode, it'll work now. Now, the thing about this is, if you have just one... I'm not in texture paint mode. My bad. There we go. Giggles, there you go. So, with something like this gets tricky because a lot of the time, you're not always aware of what way faces are facing. And so, if you have the whole primitive, it's pretty easy to flip it. If you have something like this, I'm willing to bet some of these... Nope. Blender went and proved me wrong. A lot of times when you're working with extrusion, faces will flip themselves in weird ways. Just to show you what that would look like, I'm going to flip those and back into texture mode, paint mode. And now, if we paint, we can paint on everything except those. This is probably the most common problem I've seen with this particular issue, is where as a result of modifications and extrusions and just editing the geometry in that way, it's just messed itself up. Again, super easy to fix this. You just need to make sure, check your face orientation, and instead of selecting the whole mesh, you can just select the faces that need to be flipped. There's not a quick way to select interiorly facing faces. I wish there was. I read an article about why it's impossible, more or less. Ah, there we go. Blender has come to my rescue in the worst possible way. So, as you can see, when I deleted that extrusion and put a new face in there, I now have this one singular face that is facing the wrong way. And even though you can't see it, why am I like this? There we go. Even though you can't see it, it's there. I love it when that happens. I was like, man, I really hope this extrusion actually flips some faces, and it didn't. And I was going to be very sad. All right, let's flip that. And very cool. All right, yeah. So that's the face extrusion, the face normal issue. It's a big one with texture painting. So just keep that in mind. If something's not working right, check your face orientation. The next thing sounds kind of obvious, but it is still important. So when you switch into texture paint mode, you've got a variety of tools. You've got the draw, the soften, the smear, the clone, the fill, and the mask. The problem is, you could be using one of these, not the draw, and not be aware of it. So for example, let's do soften. Let's close that toolbar so you can't tell. Absolutely nothing's happening. I mean, technically things are happening, but because this image is this flat black right now, you're not going to see anything happening. So just check to make sure that you've got that draw selected so that it will in fact draw. Sounds obvious, but that's tripped me up several times. Alright, now let's talk about images. So in order to texture paint, you have to have an image that you're painting onto. This is all very fine and dandy in a case like this, where we've got, if you look over here, we've got an image. Just one singular image, that's the only one. Pretty cool, pretty simple. The problem starts to arise when we have multiple images. For example, if I was to add another image texture here, and then let's go and make a new image. Dang, my mouse is acting up. There we go. Just add an image and call it the bad image, because this is not the one we want. Cool. So now, when we texture paint, you'll be painting on the bad image. What the heck? I thought I fixed that. Yeah, I did. Okay, not sure why that happened, but either way, as we're painting on the bad image here, Very cool. Alright, so I'm not sure why, but for some reason it wasn't actually painting on the bad image that first time. But this is actually a really good object lesson for the point I'm trying to make, is right now I'm drawing and nothing's happening because I'm drawing on this bad image. In fact, let's go up to the image editor, and you can see here, as I'm scribbling, things are happening on that image, but they're not happening on the image that's actually connected to things in the shader editor. It's super easy to do this when you're working with a node setup that has multiple images. For example, if you're using one image for specularity and one image for base color, you got to make sure you're painting the color on the color and the specularity on the specularity. Let me show you another way that can... I'm just going to delete my bottom cube image and go with the new bottom cube. I know I'm not naming my images very well. I'm just making a tutorial, so I don't really care. Alright, cool. That's that. Now, let me show you one other thing. Yeah, there it is. So, with texture painting, you've got your texture slots, and you've got an option for material and an option for single image. With material, you need to make sure you have the right one selected in the shader editor. And if you only have one, it will just default to that one. Good to know. The single image mode, however, does something different. So see, right now, I've got this selected, and I've got this set to single image, but if I paint, absolutely nothing will happen. This is because there is no image that's being painted on. You either need to link an image, in which case you can do that. I'm not sure what's wrong with that, but again, I'm not too concerned. Or you need to create a new image, the final cube, and then you can yeah, that's yet another thing. So if you're painting on an image that's not connected, you'll need to switch it here. In this case, now you can see I'm doing that. What's really entertaining to me about this is that even as I'm doing this tutorial and talking about things that can get you while you're texture painting, the things that can get you while you're texture painting are getting me while I'm texture painting. This is precisely why I'm making this tutorial, because little things like this, you think you know them and then they just come and get you anyway, and it's nice to make sure that you're not going crazy. Those are essentially the most common gotchas. There's one other thing that's kind of weird, and it's probably not applicable to most people, but if you're painting with a stylus, so I've got a stylus down here. If you're painting with a stylus and you switch to a mouse, it doesn't usually work until you switch out of texture paint mode, and not even then. Yeah, if you have a stylus connected, you can't usually texture paint with the mouse. I don't really know why that is, but it's just something to be aware of if you are trying to do both. Just make sure that you're aware that you need to use either the stylus or the mouse, and you can't really do both. Well, that's about it for this video. There's all kinds of other ways texture painting can go wrong, as you've seen in this video. As me trying to explain how things can go wrong, I've had a lot of things go wrong. But honestly, again, that kind of just goes with what I'm trying to say. And again, I acknowledge there's other things that can go wrong. I just wanted to collect some tips in one place to make it easier when you're just pulling your hair out, saying, why isn't my brush doing anything? It might be one of those 6 reasons. Hopefully it's one of those 6 reasons.